Okay, everyone. Today I have on Dr. Tasha Brown, and she is the director and founder of TMB Psychological Services. She's a parenting expert who provides a wide variety of evidence-based clinical care to children, adolescents, parents, and young adults. So we're going to touch on a few different things today, including some mental health and then summertime and schedule changes and shifts coming up that are going to be happening for all of us, for our kids, for the parents. And I'm just really excited to pick her brain, especially as a parenting expert, because I'm like, how do you become an expert in this thing? I feel like there's not a rule book. They're like, here's your baby, good luck. And you're like, great, I have to figure everything out now. So I'm excited to chat with you. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and to get.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'd love to start with how did you get into this industry? And like, what does it mean? Like, what does it mean that you're a parenting expert and that you deal with like mental health with kids and adolescents and parents and kind of the whole family dynamic?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I'm like, oh, am I really a parent expert? I always tell parents that they are the experts in their children. I am just here to um, help you figure out how you can use your own expertise with your child. So I'm actually a clinical psychologist. I have been in the field for many years. I always tell the story. I actually got interested in psychology when I was a teenager. There was this family at my church, and one of the children in the family had like significant behavioral difficulties. And I was so intrigued by just the whole dynamic, like, what's going on here? Like, why is everyone having a really difficult time, like, figuring this out? And I remember saying, like, oh, I want to work with kids, like, who are having difficulties like that, and families who are having concerns in that way. So that was kind of like my spark into clinical psychology, working with children, working with families. And since I've worked at a major hospital system in New York City, and then I recently transitioned full time into my smaller practice where I work with children, families, adolescents on a wide variety of mental health concerns.
hmm And I mean, you see more of that. I don't know if there's definitely more mental health things happening, especially in adolescence and that age group.
Mhm.
But also there were so many things for so long that maybe were normalized that aren't normal. So things that had misdiagnosis and different things that like happened that now we actually have a name for it and we have a way to work with it, like so you see that evolving. So it's like, okay, is there more of this one thing happening, or do we just have more awareness about it? And so we can kind of approach it from a different angle.
Yeah, that is such a good question. And parents ask me this question all the time. They're like, well, when I was growing up, like we didn't have this, or I didn't hear about this. And I think it's a wide variety of things. One, yes, we now the research when we think about like what we actually know about mental health in general, and then what we actually know about children and adolescents and their mental health, we know so much more. So things that 25 years ago, 30 years ago, we honestly didn't have a name or understanding of what that was. Research and science has really caught up, and now we do know what certain things are, and not only do we know what they are, we're able to identify them, so we can say like, this is what this looks like, and maybe 10 years ago we thought it just looked like this, but now we know it looks like all of these other things. And I always have parents go back and say like, did these things really, a lot of parents are like, this didn't even exist, and I'm like, did it not exist, or did we just not have a name for it? Like, think back to your classes, think back to all the kids you used to hang out with. I'm pretty sure there's some kids who, looking back, you're like, oh, okay, like if we were to put a name to something, we would have had this. Also, I think that in 2020, Right in the midst of the pandemic, the US Surgeon General actually put out a crisis alert saying that we are in the midst of a mental health crisis for children and adolescents. We were seeing like a huge increase in emergency room visits. We were seeing a huge increase in families seeking out treatment for their children. So there has been an increase in mental health concerns in the last few years because children and adolescents have been through a lot in the last couple of years. COVID, thinking about homes, getting schooled at home, transitioning back into the classroom. There's a lot happening in the world. So children are being impacted in a different way than they ever have throughout history.
Yeah, yeah, that's so true. Um, I I'd love to touch on this wasn't something I was like necessarily planning on asking, but um like since you do like the parenting thing, I find for myself that learning to parent, because I just have toddlers. So I have a 3.5-year-old, a 2-year-old, and then a 5-month-old. So
Uh-huh. One
they're
time.
all very close in age. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Um, that I've always found myself to be like a pretty nurturing person. Especially like being in the birth work field and stuff like that. That's just, I think, a gift that I was given, that I'm just like a nurturing person. And then when
Mhm.
motherhood came, I knew that it would be hard. I knew that things, um, I knew it wouldn't be what I expected, because how can you expect something like you've never experienced? Like I knew that I had never been sleep deprived before. I had never experienced all these different things, but I didn't expect the trigger of, whoa, I have a lot of my own trauma and emotional healing to do, to
Mhm.
like be so like boom, like
Mhm. Like,
holy crap. Yeah.
yeah.
Like, this is wow. Like just the things that were triggering off in me of like, this is not about my 18-month-old. This is about me. This is
Yeah.
my own stuff. And like having to go back to therapy, like I just wasn't like prepared even for, I feel like our generation is like the first that's trying to like heal generational traumas and things like that. And I just was like smacked in the face with it. So do you like work with families, I guess, kind of going through that, where it's like we're bringing in parents who are like, okay, I grew up in the like kids are seen, not heard, and you just do what
Mhm.
you're told, and there was no bodily autonomy or anything like that. And now we're trying to do things different, but we're also trying to like set boundaries and guide
Yes.
our kids. I'm not just gonna be like, my kid's like, hey, I want ice cream. And it's like, okay, sweetie, like,
Yeah.
it's not like that either. So I'm sure you get people like coming to you that are like, how do I balance the two worlds, and how do I heal myself?
Yeah, one of the things that I always ask parents, especially when I work with younger children and families, is me and the parent caregiver, we talk about how they were parented, what their household dynamic was like, how they were disciplined, what their relationship was like with the people who cared for them, because all of those things are important. You just don't go into parenting and caregiving like, you know what, I'm just going to do me. You go in with everything that you've experienced, even if it's not at the forefront of your mind, or even if you've said, you know what, I'm not bringing this into my parenting, it's coming in there with you. And so a lot of times we spend some time talking about like, what did this look like in your family dynamic? What are you trying to recreate? And what are you trying to say, like, you know what, I don't want to recreate that here. And when families make decisions like that, there's a lot that plays into that. If you are still in contact with your family that raised you, and you or your children are going to have contact with your parents or your caregivers, parents also have to think about, okay, what does that look? I've decided to do something completely different than what my caregivers did. How do I navigate that conversation with grandma or grandpa or my aunt or my uncle? And I think I always urge parents to think about, what are your values around parenting? What is important for you to um, prioritize in your parenting, and using that as a guide for everything. So if your priority with your child is relationship, so for parenting, one of your values is I want to have a good relationship. Relationship is a priority. When we think about discipline, when we talk about setting boundaries, when we talk about socializing, how can your relationship with your child and how you navigate that or talk about that or nurture that with your child be at the forefront of what you're doing, and intentionally sitting down and saying, what are my values in parenting and what does it look like? Because if there's not that intentionality behind it, it's natural and human to just do what you
Yeah.
know, what you learned. And what you know and what you've learned is what you've experienced and what you may have experienced as a child.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
that
it's
makes
hard
sense.
work. It brings up a lot, and it takes time. So what your child triggers in you when they're 5 is very different than what they trigger in you when they're 15 or when they're
Yeah.
18. And so I always tell parents, like, it's a process. You it's beautiful that you're thinking, okay, let me do the work so that I recognize like what is triggering me in this parenting dynamic, and recognizing that you have to continue to do the work because your child will continue to evolve as a person, your relationship will continue to evolve, and there may be certain things that are not even in your mind right now, that may pop up when your child experiences a new developmental phase.
Right. So just the work is never done.
Because it's relationship, and one of the beautiful things, this is why I love working with families, is that parent child relationship is an intentional relationship, and I think that um, the field of psychology is like newer in thinking about the significant importance of the parent child relationship, and just like any other relationship that you want to nurture and develop and set boundaries in and think about how it's going to change over time, and make it this mutual thing where both parties feel respected and heard, just like any other relationship that develops over time, and it's going to look different depending on a wide variety of things.
Hmm. Um, I like that you said that both parties feel respected and heard, because I think that even that could be a little like
Mhm.
for some people, because they're like, okay, but it's a child, like they need to do what I say, they need to whatever. And it's like, okay, but you're also talking about a human being. Like
Yes.
children have rights too. And I think that that's where it can be hard, because it's like they're kids, so they don't know a lot. So it's our job to guide them, but they're
Mhm.
still like human beings, and they need to be treated like human beings. Like you wouldn't, you know, yell at your friend the same way you'd yell at your kid.
Mhm.
Whereas I definitely yell at my kids and and then I get really mad at myself, and like I've had to like apologize to my kids. And my 3-year-old told me, she's like, Mom, I just get so sad when you yell at me. And I'm like, I know, I am so sorry. I'm like, I should have taken a step back. I should have taken a breath. I was upset, and we like talked about it. I know she's like 3.5. She can only like, but
I love
she
that. That's so beautiful. The
she well
fact that
she oh, go
Sorry.
ahead.
I was gonna say the fact that she even feels comfortable saying, like, mommy, when you yell like that makes me sad, like that shows that she knows that your relationship is safe enough for her to share her feelings. And then on top of that, you responding with the acknowledging and accepting what you did and apologizing to her. That shows that reciprocal type of relationships, because that could happen with a friend, that could happen with any person that you have a relationship with. You do something that they don't like. Very often with children, when adults do things that they don't like, the child feels like, oh, I can't say anything because there's
Right.
this power dynamic here. And over time, when children become teenagers, very often they end up in my office and parents are like, well, I don't know why they can't talk to me or why they don't want to talk to me. And then we have to, okay, how did you create and like nurture this relationship over time? So I love this exchange because you're setting your 3-year-old up for when she's 13, when she's 16, and something happens, you've already set the foundation that we can like talk this through, like
Yeah.
for real.
Yeah. Cool. I'm doing something right. It's like so easy to feel like you're like failing at stuff. in
Mhm.
motherhood. And it's so easy. Like, I was just talking with my husband last night because I just feel like I'm in the throes of it right now, like being 5 months postpartum with two toddlers and like trying to run a side hustle out of my house. Like I'm I'm like, oh my gosh, like I feel
Yeah.
like I'm half-assing a lot of things and not doing any of them well. And
Mhm.
so I'm like, like how do I set intention here and there? Like, so then like when I'm with my kids, being fully focused and present there and being like, okay, I'll do work stuff later. And then when I'm doing my work stuff, like be focused there. But it can feel really hard. And um it's I love what you said earlier about setting your intentions in parenting, because
Mhm.
that's something that I haven't like we set together like as a family. We have family I'm losing the word right now. Intentions could be a word, but like just family, our values.
Mhm.
Yeah, our family values. So my husband and I like sat down and went over like what our family values are. So we try to like remind ourselves and each other of that. And then like our kids of that, like one of them is I can do hard things. So like whenever my daughter's like, I can't do it. We're like, you can do hard things. You can do it. And then she called me out on it once. Like my husband was like, a while ago, he was like, okay, you could do it with something. And I'm like, no, I can't. She goes, Mom, you can do hard things. And I was like, dang it, now I have to do it. Like she called me out. But for specifically parenting, I haven't done that. And I feel like when you have that drawing board to come back to, it's like, okay, am I parenting in my intentions right now? And what these are the things I value as a parent. Am I aligning in this? I feel
Yeah.
like more lately it's been like, okay, God, help me to love these kids as you love me and for me to be a reflection of you. And
Mhm.
that's, and then I screw it up. So
Mhm.
I'm like, like, but I think having things to come back to, like, okay, am I, meeting them with compassion? Am I like whatever those things are? And then you kind of have your own standards of
Mhm.
even when you are upset or the kids are melting down or nobody's listening, it doesn't mean you have to yell back. It's like, okay, how can I meet this situation with compassion and understanding and also setting boundaries? And all, it's like, it just also feels like a lot.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And just listening to you, it sounds like you have a lot of parenting values, compassion, value, making sure your children feel heard and respected, making sure you're modeling a behavior that you want them to emulate. Like it sounds like you already have a lot of parenting values, and just listing those out and feeling confident in the fact that just like with any relationship, um, I always talk to parents about this. Like, there's in the parenting child relationship, there's always this one party, the parent or caregiver, who's like striving for as close to perfection as possible. Like, I'm trying to be the perfect parent because I don't want to like screw this kid up in like some way, shape, or form. Um, but perfection in relationship is not as human dynamics in relationships, perfection in relationships are not possible. And so your children are going to learn so much from seeing you be human and seeing that, okay, my mom has like all these values. She teaches me these things. And there are times when she doesn't live up to all of those things because she's a human. And when she doesn't, I have seen her recover or address these things in so many different ways. And just that model of this is going to be a relationship where we both, the child and parent, do things that ideally we wouldn't want to do or ideally doesn't really mesh with the value of our family or the value of how I want to parent. And your children, when they get older, the value of like how I want to be in this relationship with my parent. But it's okay. Our relationship foundation is strong enough to be empathetic to the other person when they are not living up to the ideal that they've set for themselves, and also be caring and compassionate enough to say we can like move on,
Mhm.
and that's so beautiful when it's and powerful for children when it's demonstrated like in the parent child relationship, because they're going to have friendships and they're going to have relationships with their future spouses and they're going to have relationships with people at work and relationships with people at school, and they can't show up perfectly in those relationships. There's going to be times when they do things or experience things or show up in ways that are not ideal. And from their foundational relationship with you, they'll learn, okay, like, okay, when I show up in these ways that don't, how do I recover? I apologize. I take accountability. I don't hold a grudge. I know that we can move on and we can mend this. Like, you in your humanness are able to show that and model that to your children, and that's a beautiful gift to provide your children because it will help them in many relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, I can see that. One more thing on parenting before we move on to kids. How do you like parents who maybe aren't on the same page? So you hear a lot, I hear a lot. I
Yeah.
think like all the accounts that I follow on Instagram, it's all like birth and parenting and health. That's like all I see. But you know, it's when parents maybe aren't on the same page with how to like approach certain things, um, or even the primary caregiver's been home all day and the one who's been at work comes home and can be like, wait, why'd you do this? And it's like, you didn't know that this was like the 20th time that this has happened today. And like, you know, like, or like the opposite. Because one thing I know we strive for is just to have each other's back in front of our kids, and then if we disagree with something, to like talk about it later. Um, but it doesn't mean that we're always on the same page with everything, and you can just see that like kids. We went through a premarital course, and we were like, we're good, and then we
You're
had
kidding. Like, wait.
and even like even if you have the same values, like we have the
Yeah.
same values, we wanted to like implement the same things in our home, but the way that we go about that's different. You're still taking two people who grew up completely different in different lives and different areas and different homes, different dynamics, and bringing them together. So and then a kid comes in the picture and it's like, wait, I thought that we had talked about everything and we were on the same page with everything. But
Yeah.
then new situations arise and you're like, okay, wait, we're not seeing eye to eye here. Like, how do we resolve this? Because our ultimate goal is raising our kids in the right way.
Yeah.
One thing we always do is remind each other we're on the same team. We're not against each other. We want the same thing. So how do we like come back to that? But like, how do you manage those differences in parenting styles?
Yeah, that is such a great question because it comes up like literally every day. And I love this start with the reminder we're on the same team here. We have the same ultimate goal. Because very often parents are on the same team, they do have the ultimate goal. But because, like you said, a wide variety of factors, they think about things and their views are different. I always tell parents, like when they come in for an intake, and I'm seeing two parents, I'll say, I'll have a form that needs to be completed. And I always give one to each caregiver. And they're like, no, we can fill it out together. And I'm like, no, fill them out separately and don't share answers because naturally you are going to perceive and understand and think about things very differently than each other because you're two separate people. And that is okay. And your children over time will learn, oh, mommy's into this, daddy's like, they'll learn that your differences. Um, it's important to be on the same page and to provide that unified front. And I think important to have a conversation about what are the things that is extremely important that we um, present as a extremely unified front on. So a good example about this is like discipline. I always use this as like if your child does something wrong or they're not listening or they're not following directions, one of the easiest ways to spur up like behavioral difficulties or concerns with child is to just have inconsistency in how it's responded to. And very often parents like behind the scenes may have different views about how to and why and what discipline should look like and could like look like. But my goal is how do we get on the same page in terms of like what your child sees is consistent between both of you, because what your child sees can be consistent while you still behind the scenes work out the getting on the same page and talking about and debating why you feel this way or that way, like behaviorally what your child sees. Are you on the same page? And having conversations about it and deciding what are some of the things that if we're not on the same page about, one party's just going to say like, you know what, we'll do it the way that feels more comfortable for you, and I'll respect that even if it's not ideally what I want or what I would do. It's having conversations, and being able to think about your family dynamic, and how your family flows. So if one caregiver is home for 8 hours a day, and the other caregiver is there but is towards the end of the day, when you think about things like the routine, and the parent who's there for 8 hours a day may say like, I really believe this about a routine, and the other person's like, well, I don't think so. Maybe you want to defer to the person who's going to be carrying out the routine, and being able to give and take. And I always tell parents like, you're not always going to be on the same page about everything. That's the reality.
Mhm.
However, what can you agree to think about ways that you can present to your children as a unified front, in terms of the things that are important? Some people may say like, you know what, we're not on the same page about like how we structure free time when we're with the kids alone. And you may decide, okay, when you're with the kids alone, you do this and you do this, and your children will learn to like navigate that. But it's important that we're on the same page about discipline, or about how we eat, or about how we treat other people, like deciding what is absolutely important to present as a united front on, and then what are some things that like, okay, we're not on the same page about it, it's not going to be detrimental to our family.
Mhm. Yeah, I love how you mentioned consistency earlier. Um, my husband had read a parenting book, and he's read it like a couple of times, and that's like what the author speaks a lot about is like the consistency, and that's like where you end up in these power struggles with your kids, and it's when they do this one thing and you yell at them 10 times and then they finally stop this time. But then
Mhm.
next time it's like whatever, I'm over it. And so you just let them do it. And then the next time you're like, stop that right now. And it's like,
You're like,
like they
hey,
don't
what's
know.
happening here? Yeah.
Right. Or they just know that, okay, if I keep going, like my parents are going to yell at me once, they're going to yell at me twice, and then they're going to be like, no, you have to go sit in timeout. But then I
Mhm.
get my way. Why am I ever going to stop doing this? Like the consistency of like, okay, these are the things that we keep consistent in our home, like so I feel like that can definitely be hard. I find myself sometimes being like, crap, I hate like when I'm like, hey, listen, like if we're gonna do that, we have to shut off the movie right now. And then
Yeah.
they do it. And so I'm like, okay, now I have to follow through, even
Mhm.
though I'm trying to like write a blog and like get other things done. So it's so much easier for me if you just keep watching the movie. But now I have to follow through with what I said.
Yes.
And so don't like give consequences that like you're not willing
That
to
you
follow
can't
through
carry
on.
out. Yeah. Yes.
So
That
that's hard.
consistency is so key. I want a sign in my office that says be consistent. You just inspired me to get a sign that says be consistent,
Do it.
because that is consistency helps children to feel safe and secure. And children thrive on consistency. And it's not just consistency for the sake of like getting through your day easily, it's consistency for helping your children feel like this is a safe, secure environment, that I know is going to be stable over time. When children who have lots of inconsistency, that can cause a lot of anxiety, behavioral difficulties. And so when you talk about consistency is important for so many different reasons. So I love that you're thinking about how can we be consistent, um, in different ways.
I'm just realizing as an adult that consistency makes me feel safe and like able to thrive because I have a hard time with like scheduling my day and maybe like time management and being like, okay, I need to like this, like I do better with structure. And in motherhood, I've had a hard time finding structure in it, setting it up for myself. Like when I had a clock in, clock out job, it was so much easier for me to be consistent and check everything off my list. And now that it's like my kid might wake me up at 6, it might be
Yeah.
7, it might, like just different things. I have a harder time. So I'm like, okay, what are a few things that can be consistent for me that I'm like, okay, I can check this off my list today. This is like my consistency. So at least though I don't need to worry about those. And I've been like slowly trying to build that for myself and figure out what that is because I realize I thrive so much more. And it's a really, really a struggle for me. It's something that I'm working on every single day to be like, okay, like eating breakfast, we're gonna count that as like a
Yes.
consistency. Like we're gonna, like just the small things. Um, and so I'm like, and I think that that's like what's helped me in parenting a little bit is like, wow, like I know that I feel so much better with these things. I can't even imagine a 3-year-old. Or
Mhm.
like, what if I'm really upset about something? And so I'm trying to express that I'm upset about something, but then I'm just being yelled at. Like I'm
Mhm.
crying over something that upset me, and they're like, stop crying, stop crying. Like if somebody's like yelling at me, like how would that feel? Like probably not great. So yeah, I think that somehow we forget that children are people too.
Yes.
And that it's okay to validate your kids. It doesn't mean that you're saying, hey, do whatever you want, write on the walls with permanent marker. I don't care. Like, it doesn't mean that. You can still validate and love them and set boundaries and have discipline. I know that there's like different things out there. And it depends on like how you view it. But for us, I mean, we do have like consequences for different actions in our home. So yeah, I thrive with routine and consistency. I need somebody to come parent me again. I'm like,
I love that you talk about finding a few things to be consistent about. Because realistically, at this stage in parenting for you, just by nature of the ages of your children, you can't be consistent with everything because your children are not consistent yet. They're still developmentally in a phase where they're going to be changing. So, what are the few things that you can point out that we're always going to be consistent with that are realistic to be consistent with? Sometimes I'll talk with parents about, okay, like let's make what part of the day do you want to create some sort of routine with? And parents will be like, let's do the morning routine. I'm like, okay, tell me what your mornings look like. And then they'll start describing their mornings to me. And I'm like, one morning the day may start at 8, and the other morning it may start at 11. And then two caregivers may be there versus one. And I'm like, this is not a consistent, it is the time isn't even consistent. Let's think about creating routine where there's already some consistency and there's like already something that you and your child like know is going to happen. And then over time, that consistency and that routine will change because you'll change as a person, then you'll change as a mother, your children will change as people, and what requires routine and consistency is going to look different.
yeah, that makes sense. Well, and speaking of consistency, we're coming up on summertime. So everybody's schedules are going to be like so thrown off. Um,
Mhm.
I'd love to maybe hear from you how to navigate that because it's also different in each home. Like some parents will be home with their kids over the summer, some won't. They still have to go to work. So, um, so their kids will be doing something else besides school. And some parents I know look forward to summer and some parents dread
It's
it.
like,
So,
no. Yeah. We know that the summertime is fun and great, and also it can present a lot of challenges for a number of reasons. There's a drastic change in routine for many families and children. Speaking of routines, like once the summertime hits, also there's a lot of changes in who, if you're, especially if your child is like school aged or if they're in daycare, there's a lot of changes in who they're around. and maybe what they're involved in. Some things may be on a break over the summer. So their level of engagement in extracurricular activities may change. Caregivers may even change. So your babysitter who's there for the school year may be different than the summer, or maybe you're a parent who takes off a lot of time during the summer. So now you have a lot more time with your child than you typically do. All of those things like throw things out. And I always tell parents to think about three different things to help support through the summer. Number one, create and maintain a summer routine that's specific to the summer months. So your morning routine for the school year or for the winter and spring months may be dramatically different than your summer one. And that's okay. That's completely okay. You may be super structured during the school. Like we wake up, we eat breakfast, we put on our shoes, we get to the bus. And in the summer, you may say, we wake up, we lounge around for an hour, we eat breakfast, and then we go to the park. Create a routine that works for the summer, and prepare your child and yourself and whoever's in the family for that change. So even if your child is 2, have a conversation. All right. It's summer. So instead of us getting up at 7 o'clock, we're going to wake up at 7:30 tomorrow. And then we're going to X, Y, Z, help prepare your child for what the day is going to look like, especially in the summer when every day could look dramatically different. You may go on vacation, or you may travel, or people may start coming to visit. Prepare your child for those things, because think about, I'm going back to what you said earlier, like we forget that children are people too. Just imagine like you wake up in the morning and you open your door and there's like 3 family members that you had no idea were coming to your house. As an adult, you'd be like, whoa, like what's happening here? Same thing for kids, like waking up and seeing a bunch of changes and like who's around or where you are, it can be extremely jarring. So prepare your child for the changes that are coming throughout the summer. That's going to help you as a parent and as a caregiver, because your child will feel more at ease. And then um, the summertime does, for some families, presents a lot of downtime. And then for other families, it presents like this over scheduled, like we have this, and this, and this. So for families where there's a lot of scheduling occurring, I always say find some ways to give your children and yourself some downtime, because it can be extremely exhausting to keep up with camp after activity or play date. That becomes exhausting for not only your child, but for you as the parent or caregiver to maintain. Like that's a lot. And then for kids and families that find themselves on the other end of the spectrum where there's not a lot of things scheduled or there's not a lot to do, just parents and caregivers really thinking about ways to keep your children as engaged and as possible, because we know that with, especially for younger children, a lot of unstructured time where there's not a lot of engagement happening can lead to some behavioral concerns and just a harder time when it's time to get back on some sort of routine when the fall comes.
Yeah, that makes sense. You said about the people who like schedule a lot,
Mhm.
um, like to schedule in downtime in there. And I can hear some people listening to this saying, yeah, but as soon as it's downtime, then they're like, we're bored, we're bored, we're bored. Like, how do you like navigate that? Because then they feel we kind of like live in this time now where we feel like we have to continually entertain our kids and continually like do stuff. I'm definitely not that mom. Like, here's a stick, have fun. But I think also like as they get older and there's just so many different things now, that they're like, okay, but as soon as we get downtime, then they're bored and they're driving me crazy. So
Mhm.
like, how do I schedule that downtime when it doesn't feel like downtime? Because then they're just like complaining.
Mhm. I would say give your child some options. So we are gonna have a few hours before we go to the pool later. During this time, you can either take a nap, you can read a book, you could color, you can make a fort in the living room, you can go on your iPads if you allow screen time. Giving your child options and um this is hard. I'm going to say it and I know it's hard. When that I'm bored, I don't know what to do. Not feeling the pressure to then like perform as a parent or caregiver and say, like, oh my goodness, let me plan something, let me do something. Just like children have to learn what to do during scheduled time, they also have to learn what to do with unscheduled time. And as adults, we forget that we had to learn that also. Like, we don't just naturally know, like, oh, what do I like to do during my downtime? We have to learn that about ourselves over time. Like, oh, I enjoy like reading, or I enjoy like crocheting, or I enjoy like going for a walk. Children have to have opportunities to learn how to structure their own time or how to fill their own time or how to entertain themselves. And they're only going to learn that if they have the opportunity.
Hmm.
In
Yeah.
those moments where they're like, I'm bored, there's nothing to do, present options and then pull back.
Hmm.
And eventually, consistently doing that, very often children will learn, like, oh, yeah, I have to engage in one of these other things because there's no other options available to me right now.
Right, right. I know my oldest is only 3, and there's
Mm,
like we've tried to like reduce screen time significantly, um, just because I realize a difference in her behavior when
mm,
she watches a lot of TV or movies. And so in the morning, she always asks to watch a movie. This girl could watch movies all day long. She
yeah.
also likes to like reenact them. So we have like this big mirror, and opposite of it is like our fireplace thing, and she
Uh-huh.
stands on it because she can see herself in the mirror, and she like acts out the movies like while she watches them.
Yeah.
um but I want her to like do other things. So in the morning, she's always like, "Can I watch a movie?" And I'm like, "Not right now, honey. We're not going to watch movies this morning." And then I just like avoid kind of. And then
Mm,
eventually she stops asking and finds like something else to do. So
yeah.
I'm like, "Not right now. No, we're not going to." And she'll like get upset. And I'm like, "I know you're upset, but we're, not today." And so she, like it's annoying for like a little bit, and then she like moves on. But like I said, she's only 3. I have no idea what this is like with an 8-year-old. I have no idea what this is like with a 13-year-old.
Yeah.
So I can't comment to those things. But I realized that, man, because the first time I did it and I like really stuck to my guns, and I'm like, oh, she just gives up after a little bit. That's
Mhm.
nice. And then I realized that's all I have to do. I'm like, she just eventually gives up. It's great.
And your consistency of doing that teaches her, like, okay, I can do this for but so long, or I just should probably just go and entertain myself in some other ways because you're consistent in your response to that. And she's
Yeah.
learning how to entertain herself and what she likes to do and how to do it independently. She's learning all of that, um, as she as you're giving her that opportunity. And as her siblings get older, that will introduce a whole different dynamic when they can like entertain each other or think about things that they want to all do together. um,
Hmm.
if she wants to do something alone while they do something together, or there's like all those variations of how kids have downtime on their own.
Right. Or it results in a lot more fighting, I've realized. I'm like, oh man, it'd be so much easier to just turn this on because you guys
Mhm.
wouldn't be screaming and hitting each other over wanting the same toy that neither
Mhm.
of you even want to play with or care about. Like, I'm like, oh, sisters. I grew up with sisters, so I get it. And I'm like, man, it's tough, but they also love each other, and we're like, it's yeah. Motherhood is a trip. I always say that. And like parenting is such a trip. It's like it brings up so much, and it forces you to grow, and I don't know. It's definitely the hardest thing I've ever done in my life.
Yeah, yeah. It's hard, and I always um parents when they come to me for like a wide variety of reasons. One of the things that I always love to leave parents with is you get to decide what parenting looks like for you. And there's like so many, you can like open social media and just spend like hours like dissecting and like all this like parenting advice and stuff out there. And yes, I put out some of that stuff too. And I always say, even if I say something and we're in a session and you're like, I don't agree with that, like tell me in the moment, because you ultimately are the one who gets to decide like how you show up as a parent, because you know your child, you know your family dynamic, you know what's important to you, you know what you value, and once you can be firm and consistent and confident in how you choose to show up as a parent, like you're doing all the work that you need to do. So not feeling pressured because we live in this world where everyone is a parenting expert or everyone has something to say about child development. No one knows your child better than you, and no one will ever know your child better than you. So relying on the fact that I can hear this, take it in, take what works for me, take what doesn't work for me, and apply it in a way that works for my child.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Well, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Before we wrap up, where can people find and follow you? And do you work virtually with people as well?
Yeah, yeah. So you can find me at Dr. Tasha Brown on Instagram, on all social media platforms. I also have a podcast called Note to My Child Psychologist on all streaming platforms, where we talk about a lot of the similar things that we talk about, that we've talked about today. And if you go to my website, TMB Psych Services, I do offer a wide variety of mental health services in various states. And so I would definitely, if you're looking for mental health services for you or your child, feel free to peruse the website and see if anything could work for you.
Awesome. I do have one more question before we wrap up. Um, how would you know if maybe you need to seek mental health services for your child?
I love that question. That's such an important question. If your child is starting to exhibit behaviors that are getting in the way of their everyday functioning or your family's everyday functioning, that may be an indicator that like we need to seek some sort of support. So they're so nervous or afraid or clingy that they're not going into preschool, or they are having a hard time with all of their tests, or their grades are slipping. Those may be indicators that they're struggling, or they're so active or they're so inattentive that they can't get through like simple multiple part commands, or their teachers are always calling. If you start to notice behaviors or moods that start to get in the way of how your family can function and flow, I would definitely say that may be an indicator that your child is struggling and you may need some support. And one of the first lines of people that you can reach out to is your child's pediatrician. I'm like, hey, I'm noticing that this is happening, this is going on. And you and your child's pediatrician having a conversation about like what next steps can be.
Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, awesome. I will include all of the links in the show notes so people can connect with you easily. And I just want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast and for sharing your expertise with us.
Perfect. Thanks so much for having me.